April 8, 1943. High above the war-torn landscape of occupied France, at a staggering 27,000 feet, the air was thin, crisp, and deceptively clear. In the cockpit of his sleek Focke-Wulf FW-190A5, Oberleutnant Rolf Hermiken, a veteran ace with the prestigious Jagdgeschwader 26, allowed a smirk to stretch across his face, hidden only partially by the confines of his oxygen mask. His eyes, honed by years of relentless combat from the frozen steppes of Russia to the windswept skies above Britain, tracked a formation of unfamiliar, ungainly silhouettes, laboriously climbing towards his squadron. He watched, bemused, as these new American fighters struggled for altitude, their massive forms looking almost comical against the vast expanse of the sky. "The Yanks have sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted to his wingman, the crackle of his voice barely containing his laughter. The sight below him was, indeed, perplexing to a pilot accustomed to the nimble grace of a Spitfire or the vicious agility of a Messerschmitt Bf-109. 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the U.S., 4th Fighter Group, lumbered upwards in a tight formation, their 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines straining visibly against the immense 7-ton bulk of their airframes. To the German pilots, for whom aerial combat was an elegant dance of turns, climbs, and dives, these corpulent American machines were an affront to aeronautical design. Their barrel-shaped fuselages, topped with what looked like oversized greenhouse canopies and wings that seemed almost an afterthought to their massive bodies, conjured an image of absurdity. The propellers, dwarfing anything in the Luftwaffe's inventory, spun with a brute force that seemed crude, unrefined. What Hermiken, and indeed none of the German pilots circling like predatory wolves above, could have possibly grasped in that moment of derision, was the profound irony unfolding before their eyes. They were not witnessing a laughable blunder, they were witnessing the dawn of an entirely new paradigm in aerial warfare, the arrival of a weapon that would systematically, relentlessly, and brutally dismantle the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Within a mere 18 months, these flying milk bottles would shed their comical image and transform into instruments of terror. Their 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, an unprecedented concentration of firepower in a single-engine fighter, would become the most feared sound echoing across the European skies. The grim mathematics of destruction, a formula based on mass, power, and overwhelming lead, were already loaded into those broad wings. Each Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of an astonishing 6,000 rounds per minute. This was enough concentrated firepower to slice a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds, a capability that defied the very notion of aerial survivability. The profound transformation of perception and reality began that very April morning. Major Don Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, a former Eagle Squadron veteran who had transferred from flying RAF Spitfires just weeks earlier, spotted the German formation positioning for attack. He understood something his men, green to combat over Europe, had yet to learn. Survival in the P-47 required abandoning every preconceived notion they held about air combat. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt was, in essence, a radical departure from conventional fighter design philosophy. While the Germans had meticulously pursued lightweight interceptors, optimized for lightning-fast climb rates and agile turn performance, Republic aviation had forged something entirely unprecedented. They created a high-altitude juggernaut that leveraged raw mass, immense power, and unparalleled firepower to redefine the very rules of aerial warfare. Among the 56 American pilots spread across the vast French sky that morning were men who would eventually become legends, future aces whose names would strike deep fear into the hearts of the Luftwaffe. But on April 8, 1943, they were novices, piloting an untested machine, squaring off against the most experienced fighter force in the world. Pilots who had been fighting continuously since 1939. Veterans of Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans, by stark contrast, had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This unfolding saga, then, is not merely about a single aircraft. It's a gripping tale of how industrial logic and sheer engineering might ultimately defeated tactical brilliance and entrenched combat experience. It's a story of how quantity and quality merged into an overwhelming, unstoppable superiority. And, perhaps most chillingly, it's the story of how the laughter of confident German pilots slowly, agonizingly turned to terror as they discovered firsthand what 8 synchronized 50 caliber Browning machine guns could do to an enemy aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt had its origins rooted in a profound sense of panic. The year was 1940. As German fighters, with their chilling efficiency, swept across France, crushing all aerial resistance in their path, Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, received urgent specifications from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They demanded a high-altitude interceptor, a formidable machine capable of matching, if not exceeding, the best the Luftwaffe could throw at them. What Kartveli designed, however, was not merely an interceptor. It was a monster, a flying behemoth that fundamentally redefined the limits of what was considered possible in fighter aircraft. It will be a dinosaur, Kartveli reportedly admitted to his design team, a wry smile playing on his lips. But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions. This seemingly paradoxical statement encapsulated his vision. A machine of immense scale, yet one whose engineering balance would transform its size into an advantage. The XP-47B prototype, which first roared into the sky on May 6, 1941, shocked everyone who laid eyes on it. At 9,900 pounds empty, it weighed a staggering 65% more than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. This dramatic increase in weight was largely due to its massive turbo-supercharger system, an intricate labyrinth of ducts and pipes snaking through the entire rear fuselage, giving the aircraft an almost pregnant appearance. Test pilots, approaching this aerial leviathan for the very first time, would invariably ask the same incredulous question. This thing actually flies? Not only did it fly, but it flew like nothing else at altitude. The heart of this beast was the magnificent Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial powerhouse capable of producing 2,000 horsepower. Crucially, this engine could maintain its full power output at an astounding 27,000 feet, an altitude where many German fighters literally gasped for air, their performance plummeting dramatically. The turbo supercharger, fed by scorching exhaust gases, was the P-47's secret weapon, delivering sea-level performance in the rarefied air of the stratosphere, an environment simply too thin for conventional superchargers to operate effectively. Yet, this revolutionary design came with its own set of formidable challenges. Major Hubert Hub Zamke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut, initially despised the aircraft. His unit, tasked with mastering this new machine, suffered grievously. Between September 1942 and January 1943, a chilling 18 pilots and 41 aircraft were lost in training accidents. In those early, brutal months, the P-47 killed more Americans in training than German combat would in the first encounters. It was a handful. It ground-looped on landing, often veering uncontrollably. It torque-rolled violently on takeoff, threatening to flip over. And it dived with such aggressive enthusiasm that pilots quickly discovered the terrifying phenomenon of compressibility, where their controls would freeze as shock waves formed on the wings, making recovery almost impossible. But those who persevered, those who wrestled with and eventually mastered this powerful beast, discovered something truly extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a young farm boy from Oklahoma who would later become one of America's top aces with 27 victories, vividly described his first flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. This wasn't delicate aerial ballet. This was raw, unadulterated brute force, a feeling of immense, controlled power. The initial combat encounters in April and May 1943 seemed to confirm every German prejudice. The P-47s struggled. They couldn't turn with the agile Focke-Wulf FW-190s. They couldn't climb effectively with the nimble Messerschmitt Bf-109s, especially at medium altitudes. Their handling initially seemed sluggish, unresponsive. Luftwaffe pilots, quick to identify and exploit weaknesses, rapidly developed tactics to capitalize on these perceived deficiencies. They would attack from below, where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled for upward maneuverability, or they would force turning fights, where agility and finesse mattered far more than sheer firepower. Major Josef Pips Priller, the commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, a man who would become one of the most famous German aces, famously reported to headquarters after his first encounter. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana, fat targets pretending to be warriors. The statistics from those early days seem to bolster German confidence. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost a distressing 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The Royal Air Force, observing from the sidelines with their beloved Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested that the Americans might want to reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots, with their characteristic dry wit, even joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was simply to unstrap yourself and run around the roomy cockpit. But something profoundly strange, something utterly missed by German intelligence, was happening in those early, lopsided encounters. The P-47s that were shot down had absorbed truly incredible punishment before finally succumbing. One particular aircraft, returning from a mission on May 4th, bore the horrific scars of 21 20mm cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. Such damage would have, without question, disintegrated a Messerschmitt or blown a Spitfire out of the sky. The Thunderbolt's massive radial engine, famously lacking vulnerable liquid cooling systems, simply shrugged off hits that would have instantly stopped a liquid-cooled fighter cold. The sheer volume of metal, the robust construction, and the redundancy built into its systems meant it could take a beating unlike any other fighter of its time. More significantly, and with far more terrifying implications, was what happened when the P-47s did manage to get their guns on target. The Thunderbolt's weapons battery, an almost obscene concentration of firepower, created a convergence zone of destruction that German pilots had simply never experienced. Unlike the rifle-caliber weapons of early warfighters, or the potent but ammunition-limited cannons found on German aircraft, the American fighter could maintain sustained, devastating fire for over 30 seconds. An eternity in the frantic, split-second ballet of aerial combat. The event that would irreversibly begin changing German perceptions, shifting them from derision to dawning dread, unfolded on June 26, 1943, over Laissez France. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron, and an encounter that would become legendary on both sides of the conflict. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was returning from escort duty, a long, tiring flight, when they were suddenly bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf FW-190s from Seckung. Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect textbook attack, diving from the blinding glare of the sun with an overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson's Thunderbolt, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the merciless crossfire of multiple attackers, absorbing catastrophic damage in the very first seconds of combat. A brutal 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his aircraft. The canopy shattered, spraying razor-sharp shards of plexiglass. Hydraulic fluid, thick and oily, streamed into the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn away, ripped violently by the concussive force of impacts, and then, most terrifyingly, fire erupted behind the instrument panel, licking at the edges of his vision. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments, his cockpit a maelstrom of destruction, instinctively tried to bail out. But he discovered, to his utter horror, that the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded directly in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped, utterly trapped, in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. The cold, unforgiving void of the stratosphere waiting below. What transpired next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having absolutely no forward visibility through an oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, threatening to tear itself from its mounts, and controls that responded only intermittently. If at all, Johnson, fueled by sheer adrenaline and an iron will, somehow managed to level the aircraft and point its shattered nose toward the distant coast of England. The P-47, against all odds, continued flying with damage that would have unequivocally reduced any other fighter to falling debris, a rain of twisted metal. Then the situation became even more dire. A lone Focke-Wulf FW-190, flown by an unknown pilot from the Sachsen JG-26, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt, limping desperately toward the English Channel at a pathetic speed of less than 170 miles per hour. Historical research has never definitively identified this German pilot, though several names have been proposed based on fragmented German combat reports from that fateful day. What followed was one of the most extraordinary, almost unbelievable encounters in the annals of aerial warfare history. The German pilot, confident of an easy kill, positioned himself meticulously behind Johnson's battered P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, utterly unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate, brace himself, and pray. The Thunderbolt, this flying milk bottle, absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load of the Focke-Wulf. Then, in what must have been an act of stunned disbelief, the German pilot repositioned and fired again. This time with only his machine guns, his cannon ammunition now exhausted. Still, the P-47, a mangled wreck, continued to fly. The German pilot, a mixture of bewilderment and frustration etched on his face, pulled alongside, staring in utter disbelief at the defiant, flying ruin. Johnson, through the shattered remnants of his own canopy, could see the German pilot's face clearly. Young, blond, his expression shifting from initial confidence to utter confusion, and then to something approaching genuine fear. The German pilot, perhaps unwilling to believe what he was seeing, repositioned for a third time, and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave an informal, almost deferential salute, and then peeled away, presumably completely out of ammunition and utterly confounded. Johnson's P-47, a testament to its indestructible design, eventually landed at Manston, its engine finally failing dramatically on the runway itself. The crew chief, examining the bullet-riddled airframe, stopped counting holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded mere inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the thick armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken multiple direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. Yet, this incredible aircraft had brought its pilot home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers, meticulously studying the wreckage, realized with a dawning awe that they had profoundly underestimated their own creation. German intelligence, receiving the combat reports from the KR's Jagdgeschwader 26, initially flat-out refused to believe it. No aircraft, they insisted, could absorb that much punishment and remain airborne. But testimony from multiple pilots, including the bewildered German who had emptied his guns into it, confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver, and it had survived. By July 1943, American pilots, once frustrated by their seemingly unwieldy mount, were rapidly learning to exploit the P-47's true, profound strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, the commander of the 56th Fighter Group, the very man who had once despised the aircraft, had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. His doctrine became gospel. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as its greatest disadvantage, now transformed into its most potent weapon. In a dive, nothing, absolutely nothing, could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could achieve an astonishing 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could reach, even in a vertical, uncontrolled plunge. This immense speed, gained in a dive, could then be converted back into altitude in a breathtaking zoom climb that left any pursuing German fighters helplessly behind, gasping for air and energy. Captain Walker, Bud Mahurin, who would become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic, though pilots colloquially referred to it as the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Instead of engaging in the traditional, intricate turning dogfights where German fighters excelled, P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, often higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted and dive, accelerating to speeds that made deflection shooting an impossible task for the defending Germans. At the bottom of these terrifying dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak, unleashing their hellish volley of lead. German pilots who survived these encounters described it as facing an impenetrable wall of lead. The combined firepower created a literally impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't merely fall, they disintegrated, tearing apart in midair. The true, horrifying revelation of American firepower came during the August 17, 1943, dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted by Allied bombers to that date. This mission, a brutal test of endurance and combat effectiveness, would demonstrate both the P-47's limitations. Its range, even with drop tanks, was still a concern for such deep penetrations, and its absolutely terrifying effectiveness when employed properly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt Bf 110 destroyer aircraft positioning to attack the vulnerable B-17s with their heavy cannon and rocket armament. These twin-engine German fighters, heavily armed but less maneuverable than their single-engine counterparts, were the Luftwaffe's specialized bomber killers, designed for devastating head-on passes. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet, dropping like hammers from the sky. Unafuzia Hinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the Me-110s who miraculously survived the encounter, later recounted in a post-war interrogation, his voice still tinged with horror. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart. Not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from the fuselage, tail severed, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, and Me-110 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitt Me-110s were annihilated in less than a minute. The German pilots had never, in their wildest nightmares, experienced such concentrated, overwhelming firepower. Let's delve deeper into this mathematics of destruction. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, totaling 3,400 rounds, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At the typical convergence distance, usually set at 300 yards, the ballistic paths of all 8 guns intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything unfortunate enough to be caught in that zone faced over 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at a blistering 2,900 feet per second. This wasn't a spray. It was a solid, focused stream of metal designed to tear apart anything in its path. The ammunition itself was a testament to American industrial capacity and innovation. While German fighters often struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically a mere 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could maintain their devastating fire for over half a minute, an eternity in a dogfight. The standard combat load was meticulously mixed. Armor-piercing incendiary, API, armor-piercing incendiary tracer, APIT, and standard ball ammunition. This deadly cocktail was designed not just to destroy, but to ignite, ensuring maximum catastrophic damage. The API rounds, in particular, used a delayed action fuse that ensured penetration before detonation, exploding deep within the enemy airframe. while the incendiary compound burned at a scorching 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite aluminum structure and fuel tanks with terrifying efficiency. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who would go on to become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the terrifying effect with chilling clarity. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered significantly. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to an astonishing 30,000 feet. German fighters, relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade severely above 25,000 feet, making them sluggish, unresponsive, and vulnerable in the thin air. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with a staggering 206 victories, encountered this brutal reality fatally on October 8, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader 1 against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen, Philipp found his Focke-Wulf FW-190A6 sluggish and unresponsive in the thin atmosphere. The powerful BMW 801 engine, a formidable performer at medium altitudes, was literally gasping for oxygen nearly 6 miles above the Earth. When P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from an even higher 32,000 feet, the German fighters were, to their horror, essentially sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot well on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philippe's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report, clinical in its brevity, noted, "Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree in deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philip's death sent shock waves through the Luftwaffe." If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both the Eastern and Western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? The German High Command ordered an immediate, urgent investigation into the P-47's capabilities. The report, delivered to Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring in November 1943, was sobering, chilling in its implications. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet, higher than any German fighter could reach. Its dive speed approached the sound barrier, pushing the limits of known flight. Its armor included a 3/8-inch steel plate behind the pilot, a 1/2-inch bulletproof glass windscreen, and armored deflection plates around the engine. Most disturbingly, its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that would utterly destroy 3 conventional German fighters and still return home. The flying milk bottle was, in fact, a flying tank. In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England, completing the transformation from laughingstock to outright nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with massive paddle blades, 13 feet in diameter, with broad chord blades that bit into the air like enormous oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, these paddle blade variants could achieve an impressive 3,000 feet per minute, matching or even exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also significantly improved acceleration, allowing P-47s to build energy faster in level flight, making them even more formidable. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered these new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary, a stark contrast to earlier German reports. "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The tone was no longer one of derision, but of grim, dawning realization. The paddle blade propeller did more than just improve performance. It profoundly changed the very sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive, thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could now be heard from miles away. A deep, ominous rumble. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47s by sound alone. A low, guttural growl, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, the German word for thunderclap. The laughter was gone, replaced by a primal, instinctive fear at the sound of the approaching storm. By March 1944, P-47s equipped with external fuel tanks could escort bombers deep into the heart of Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks, or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending their operational range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded with these external tanks, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping them, no longer short-legged companions. The Luftwaffe's desperate response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to halt the relentless American daylight bombing campaign. But this strategy required flying through the ever-present P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. German pilots, once contemptuous, now developed a grudging respect that bordered on outright fear for the big American fighters. Major Günther Rau, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47s on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled in a post-war interview, the memory still fresh and terrifying. "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters, just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." The long-range escort missions revealed another crucial P-47 advantage: endurance. While German fighters typically operated at maximum power settings that consumed fuel rapidly, limiting their time in the combat zone, the big American radials could cruise efficiently at high altitude. Thunderbolts could remain with the bombers for hours, rotating top cover while maintaining enough fuel for combat and the long return journey. As more P-51 Mustangs arrived to take over the very long-range escort duties in the spring of 1944, P-47 units increasingly focused on ground attack, a role that would solidify their reputation as the most feared aircraft in the German arsenal. The transition to ground attack began in earnest in April 1944, as the Allies meticulously prepared for the invasion of France. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery, already proven devastating in air-to-air combat, proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the relatively thin top armor of most German vehicles, while the sheer volume of fire could obliterate soft targets in mere seconds. A 2-second burst, as commanders calculated, put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. This was a flying shotgun blast of unprecedented scale. But it was the addition of bombs and rockets that truly transformed the P-47 into a multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under its wings and a 500-pounder under the fuselage, a bomb load equivalent to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. These were not just fighter bombers, they were flying artillery platforms. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the brutal Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. His account paints a vivid, terrifying picture. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them Yabos, fighter bombers. But these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. The very morale of the German ground forces was being systematically shredded by the relentless onslaught. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Luftwaffe discovered how utterly and completely the balance of power had shifted. Over 500 P-47s provided an impenetrable air cover for the Allied invasion, creating an aerial umbrella over the beaches that German aircraft simply could not breach. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred with ruthless efficiency. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader 2, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported the chilling reality. The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one to return. The P-47s were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47s systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were truly staggering, a testament to their destructive power. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 347 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was crippled, forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to the rapid Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor, deployed more anti-aircraft guns, developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's devastating combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 80mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its immense worth in the vast, unforgiving expanses of the Pacific Theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's inherent qualities, its incredible durability, robust engine, and immense firepower were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh combat conditions of the Pacific War. Colonel Neil Kirby, commanding the 348th, developed tactics specifically for the unique challenges of the Pacific. On October 11, 1943, Kirby famously led 4 P-47s against an astonishing 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak, personally shooting down 6 enemy planes in a single mission, an act of extraordinary valor that earned him the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, accustomed to fighting nimble but often fragile American fighters like the P-40, were utterly unprepared for the P-47's combination of firepower and durability. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, a legendary figure in his own right, who encountered P-47s over New Guinea, later wrote of his experiences. "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart. The P-47 was rewriting the rules of aerial combat on 2 fronts simultaneously. The P-47N, developed specifically for the vast distances of the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings, holding 93 gallons each, extending its range to an incredible 2,350 miles. This variant would escort B-29s all the way to Japan, proving beyond doubt that the short-legged fighter of 1943 had evolved into a true long-range strategic weapon, capable of deep strike and escort missions across oceans. Perhaps the ultimate vindication of the P-47's evolutionary journey came in its encounters with the new, terrifying German jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with its revolutionary 540 mph top speed, should have been utterly untouchable by propeller-driven fighters, a relic of a bygone era. But Thunderbolt pilots, displaying incredible ingenuity and adapting their tactics once more, discovered they could catch these formidable jets in 2 critical situations: during takeoff and landing, when the jets were most vulnerable and slow, and, surprisingly, in high-speed dives from altitude. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first pilots to shoot down an Me-262 with a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt reached speeds approaching 500 meters, fast enough to catch the jet even in a level flight. The jet pilot, perhaps overconfident in his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer's guns opened up at 400 yards. Meyer's combat report noted with a chilling matter-of-factness: the enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The concentrated fire of 8 50-caliber guns proved more effective than we anticipated against jet aircraft. It was a powerful lesson. Raw speed wasn't everything. Overwhelming firepower still held the trump card. By early 1945, specialized P-47M variants were deployed specifically to counter German jets and the terror of the V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting engine power to an incredible 2,800 horsepower and refined aerodynamics, these ultimate Thunderbolts could reach 405 meters in level flight at 30,000 feet, fast enough to intercept even jets under certain critical conditions. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron equipped with these advanced P-47Ms, shot down 2 Me-216-2s in March 1945. His tactical report emphasized firepower over speed, echoing the P-47's core philosophy. The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. One good burst from our battery, and they come apart like they're made of paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them. The ultimate, and perhaps most poignant demonstration of American industrial might, and the P-47's symbolic representation of it, came during Operation Bodenplatte, baseplate, the Luftwaffe's desperate, last-gasp attempt to destroy Allied air power on January 1, 1945. Nearly 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 Airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the attack initially succeeded, achieving a momentary, devastating surprise. German fighters destroyed 22 Thunderbolts on the ground, along with several other Allied aircraft. A captured German pilot, brought to the command post, pointed at the burning aircraft on the tarmac with a sneering taunt. "What do you think of that?" Major George Brookings' response became legendary throughout the 9th Air Force, encapsulating the entire philosophy of American war production. He pointed not at the burning wreckage, but to the flight line where ground crews were already pushing damaged aircraft aside and preparing hard stands for replacements. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones," Brookings stated, his voice calm, resolute. "How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German pilot's smirk, born of momentary victory, instantly disappeared, replaced by a grim, dawning understanding of inevitable defeat. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47D-40s, flown in from depots in England, filled the flight line, replacing every single loss. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, lost 271 aircraft and a staggering 213 irreplaceable pilots in Bodenplatte, including many vital instructors and experienced squadron leaders. These losses, in terms of human capital and accumulated experience, they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft total across all attacked airfields, all of which were replaced within a single week. The numbers, stark and unforgiving, told the story of an inevitable, crushing defeat. Republic Aviation produced an astonishing 15,183 P-47s during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale factory on Long Island completed one Thunderbolt every single hour around the clock. The Evansville plant in Indiana, built literally from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47D, a complex machine, required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of electrical wiring, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone, a masterpiece of precision engineering, contained 2,400 individual components machined to tolerances of thousandths of an inch. Yet, American workers, many of them women who had never even seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, assembled these complex machines with a precision and speed that often exceeded peacetime standards. This was the true engine of victory. The ammunition production was equally staggering. Each P-47 sortie required 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, just one of several ammunition plants, produced an astronomical 30 million rounds monthly. Each cartridge was manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, ensuring reliable feeding through the synchronized gun mechanisms, preventing jams in the heat of combat. The fuel consumption was enormous. Each Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in normal flight, up to 300 gallons in combat with water injection engaged. The Ninth Air Force alone consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly by late 1944. All of it shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves products of American mass production. Even more impressive than aircraft production was pilot training. By 1944, the United States was graduating an astonishing 30,000 pilots annually from advanced training, a figure greater than Germany had trained in the entire war. Each P-47 pilot received a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced fighters. German pilots, by stark contrast, were entering combat with less than 100 hours total flying time by war's end, some with barely 30 hours in type. The sheer quality of this American training showed dramatically in combat. American pilots arrived in Europe meticulously trained in formation flying, instrument navigation, gunnery, and sophisticated tactics. They had practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding their enemy's capabilities and limitations intimately. They knew their aircraft systems inside and out, having studied technical manuals that German pilots rarely, if ever, received. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, perfectly exemplified this American training advantage. I had 420 hours in my logbook, including 75 hours in the P-47. I'd fired at towed targets, practiced deflection shooting, studied gun camera film from actual combat. My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Josef Priller, the very same pilot who had so confidently mocked the P-47s as pregnant cows 2 years earlier, was interviewed by German propaganda officials desperately seeking to boost morale. His statement, deemed far too demoralizing for publication, revealed the complete and utter transformation in German attitudes. His words, a chilling epitaph for the Luftwaffe, resonate with a profound, bitter honesty. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter-bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented. Weapons that never jam, never overheat, never run out of ammunition in normal combat. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and fights like a fighter when needed. But beyond the machine is what it represents. Unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20, we lose 1, it's gone forever. He continued, his voice heavy with the weight of defeat. Their pilots arrive better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, spare parts for everything. We have nothing but courage, and courage without resources is just delayed defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling. The sound haunts us. Mechanical, precise, unstoppable. Like everything American, it's about overwhelming material superiority. They didn't beat us through better tactics or braver pilots. They buried us under an avalanche of steel and lead. These words were not merely an admission of defeat, but a profound reflection on the true nature of industrial warfare. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured, their irreplaceable skills forever lost. Airfields were cratered ruins, unable to support operations. But even with aircraft and fuel, German pilots faced an impossible equation. Attacking meant facing P-47 formations that owned every altitude, from ground level to 40,000 feet. Feldwebel Klaus Breitschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted a mere 12 seconds. I saw them diving from above, 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from 500 meters. My aircraft shook like it was hit by sledgehammers. The engine exploded, the wing separated. I barely escaped. In the parachute, I watched them destroy my entire staff. 6 fighters gone in under a minute. The sky rained burning aluminum and bodies. The psychological impact was complete, crushing. German pilots developed what medical officers called Jabo fever, physical symptoms of stress and terror appearing whenever Thunderbolts were reported in the area. Veterans who had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without fear became physically ill before missions against P-47s. The distinctive thunder of approaching Thunderbolts caused panic among ground troops who knew that survival meant finding cover immediately. The final statistics of P-47 operations defy comprehension, painting a stark picture of its devastating effectiveness. In the European theater, 3,652 German aircraft were destroyed in aerial combat, with an additional 3,350 aircraft annihilated on the ground. Beyond the air, the Thunderbolt was a ground attack monster. 86,000 railway cars destroyed, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles destroyed, 68,000 trucks destroyed, and 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. In the Pacific, the numbers, though smaller, were equally significant given the theater's scale. 697 Japanese aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 aircraft destroyed on the ground, 1,500 vehicles destroyed, and 150 locomotives destroyed, alongside countless barges, ships, and installations. The 9th Air Force alone, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew an astonishing 213,973 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a phenomenal 4.6.1 kill ratio in aerial combat, while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter-bomber. Behind these numbers lay an immense human cost. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. Many fell to the concentrated, unforgiving fire of American heavy machine guns. Each loss represented years of irreplaceable training that Germany, with its dwindling resources, could never recover. By war's end, the average German fighter pilot had less than 30 hours of combat experience. The average P-47 pilot, a testament to the American training machine, had over 200 hours. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberursel, captured Allied pilots were routinely debriefed by German intelligence. The meticulous records captured in 1945 revealed the fascinating and ultimately devastating German assessments of Allied aircraft. The file on the P-47, updated continuously throughout the war, showed a complete and stunning reversal of opinion, a mirror reflecting their changing fortunes. April 1943. Large, unmaneuverable fighter, inferior to German types in all performance parameters except dive speed. Machine gun armament insufficient against cannon-armed fighters. Assessment: minimal threat. December 1943. Exceptional high-altitude performance, extreme structural strength, firepower increasingly problematic, pilots showing improved tactics. Assessment: significant threat above 25,000 Allendefinjäger. June 1944. Dominant fighter-bomber, superior to all German types above 20,000 Vereinigt firepower, devastating against all target types. Structural strength makes shoot-down extremely difficult. Assessment: critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Combination of firepower, durability, and performance unmatched. Pilot quality exceptional. Assessment: unsurvivable in direct engagement. The transformation was absolute. Final. In 1985, at a poignant reunion of German and American fighter pilots in Phoenix, Arizona, former adversaries met in peace, their shared experiences now a bridge, not a chasm. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. His response, recorded on video, captured the complete transformation of perception and the bitter lessons learned. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943, he admitted, a sigh escaping his lips. "We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. The Americans don't understand air combat, we said. They built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the ones who didn't understand." He continued, providing invaluable insight into the American approach. The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed around production, firepower, and survivability. They understood that in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment and deliver devastating firepower would win. They were right. The first time I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I understood everything. The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable. The visibility excellent. The controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor. Galland's ultimate realization, however, transcended the machine itself. But what really impressed me was realizing that America built over 15,000 of these complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one required an engine more complex than anything Germany produced. Yet they built them faster than we could build simple fighters. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Those guns, we called them Roosevelt's piano because of the sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The P-47's design represented American industrial philosophy perfectly. Brute force engineering backed by seemingly unlimited resources. Every component was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars could support 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's loaded weight. The engine mount could withstand 12 Baruan forces. The control cables were doubled throughout with automatic backup systems, ensuring resilience in the face of damage. The ammunition feed system alone was a marvel of engineering. 8 separate ammunition boxes, each holding 425 rounds, fed through electric boost motors to prevent jamming during high-G maneuvers. The guns were electrically heated to prevent freezing at altitude, and each gun had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized. The convergence was adjustable from 150 to 400 yards, allowing pilots to optimize for their preferred engagement range. Even after the war, some German veterans maintained that the P-47 won through sheer quantity, not quality. That German fighters were technically superior, but simply overwhelmed by numbers. The combat records tell a different story. In engagements where numbers were equal, P-47s consistently prevailed. The heavy machine gun armament, initially dismissed as inferior to cannon, proved decisively more effective in actual combat. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells, while individually more destructive, required precise aim and had limited ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds total. The P-47's weapons, by contrast, created a probability cloud of bullets that virtually guaranteed hits even with imperfect aim. At typical engagement ranges, a 2-second burst put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, more than enough to ensure destruction. The ammunition itself, as previously noted, was superior, designed for penetration and ignition. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever mass-produced. Its empty weight of 10,000 pounds exceeded the gross weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine produced more power than entire bomber formations from the previous war. Its weapons delivered more concentrated firepower than an entire squad of infantry. Yet, it was built by the thousands, flown by kids barely out of high school, and maintained under combat conditions by mechanics who learned their trade in a matter of weeks. The transformation of German opinion, from mockery to terror, took less than 2 years. In that brutally short time, the flying milk bottle became the most feared aircraft in the Luftwaffe's experience. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without flinching spoke of P-47s in hushed tones decades after the war, their voices tinged with a deep-seated respect born of fear. At the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a beautifully restored P-47D cites among other legendary fighters. Its placard lists specifications and battle honors, but the real, visceral story is told by a small, unassuming display case containing spent .50 caliber shells and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf FW 190 disintegrating under fire. Below the display, a quote from an unnamed German pilot, taken from a 1945 interrogation report, serves as a chilling epilogue. We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you and you ceased to exist. The laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of derision and ended the war as an instrument of annihilation. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns rewrote the rules of aerial warfare and buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of lead. German pilots had scoffed and laughed at the ungainly American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh, only the chilling echoes of Roosevelt's piano lingering in the silence of a defeated sky. The ultimate lesson and enduring takeaway from the story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is a powerful one, transcending mere military history. It is a profound testament to the power of adaptability, the strategic genius of industrial might, and the critical importance of a clear-eyed understanding of the nature of modern warfare. The Germans, with their initial tactical brilliance and sophisticated design philosophies focused on agility, fundamentally misunderstood the strategic context of the conflict. They saw a dogfighter, a duelist, when the Americans were building a brawler, a force multiplier designed for an industrial war of attrition. The P-47, initially dismissed as a crude brute, evolved into the ultimate expression of this philosophy. A highly durable, immensely powerful, and unbelievably destructive platform that prioritized survivability and overwhelming firepower above all else. Its triumph was not just a victory of machine over machine, but of one strategic vision over another. It proved that in the crucible of total war, sheer tactical finesse could be overcome by the relentless, mass-produced application of devastating force. wielded by well-trained pilots who learned to maximize its unique strengths. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe. It showed the world that raw power, when delivered consistently and overwhelmingly, could turn initial derision into utter terror, and irrevocably claim the sky for the thunder.